So we need to define a rate. The word rate is usually used to define a ratio. Ratios look like fractions, but fractions are part of a whole, and ratios are a comparison of two numbers. So a rate is a ratio, or it's comparing two values. Let's say values. So like, I don't know, miles per hour is a really popular rate. Feet per second, gallons per minute. I don't know if like you're pouring water out of a faucet. So all of those are rates. So if we were going 300 miles in 5 hours, my two values that I'm comparing are this 300 miles and 5 hours. And this word in tells me that it's a ratio. You could also say per, but per is generally the one thing. And so we can write this ratio 300 miles over 5 hours. That's a rate. You may have heard somebody saying that's the going rate for something. It's like, I don't know, if you get paid $15 an hour, you get $15 per hour that you work, that is your going rate. That's how much money you make. A unit rate is super convenient. It's very nice to use because a unit rate is how much one thing is. It's how much one, capital O-N-E. It's how much one thing is. It's a 1 as a denominator. One denominator. Like the number 1. So like this 300 miles in 5 hours is a rate. The unit rate would be how much you can go in 1 hour. So just off the top of your heads, how would you do that? Go ahead. Divide by what? 300 divided by 5, which is 60, yeah. You got it. Be confident. So this is still miles, but I figured out how far he goes in 1 hour. This is a unit rate because it has a 1 in the denominator. You also may see that called 60 mph. mph is miles per hour, which you can also say for this bar right here. This bar you might hear called per or in. 60 miles in 1 hour, 60 miles per 1 hour. It looks like a fraction, but it's a ratio because it's a comparison between two different things, not a part of one whole thing. All right, so our step-by-step guide to unit rates. Again, it's pretty self-explanatory. The biggest thing is making sure you put your numbers in order. If you get your numerator and your denominator flippity-flopped, it won't work. So you're identifying the two things you're comparing. Got an email. Identify your two values to compare. Identify your two values to compare. Write it as a ratio. Make sure that the first thing goes on top. So step 2, write as ratio. The first value mentioned is the numerator, usually. I'm going to put usually because I don't want to say always in this. Usually first value equals numerator. Usually, I'm not going to say it happens all the time. I would say like 95%, 99% maybe. And then the next step, you have a choice. You can either simplify it so that there's a 1 on the bottom, or just divide. You can divide top and bottom by bottom, which will give you a 1 denominator. So like when I had 300 over 5, 300 miles in 5 hours, the denominator is 5. So I could have divided the top by 5 and the bottom by 5, and I would have gotten 60 over 1. That's one way to do it. That keeps your fraction. That keeps it as a ratio comparison. The other way to do it, you're probably going to find easier. Color. Let's do this pink. Just divide. Numerator, inside, denominator outside. Because 300 divided by 5 is still 60. You would just have to remember that that's 60 in one thing. So, because this is a whole number, all whole numbers are over 1. So this equals 60 over 1.